Hello everybody, this is Angela from Cooking for Real, and I'm responding to a challenge from Linda's Pantry, which I actually saw first from Lisa on Sutton's Days. We're going to be talking about today my top 10 canning tips. Canning tip number 1 is actually to do with poultry. This here, and it's ugly. There's nothing pretty about this, but this is turkey breast. You can do this with chicken breast as well. This one happens to have the skin on. A lot of times I do it without the skin on, but what I did was I actually put the entire breast in the jar. I didn't cut it at all, but I packed it as tight as I could on the chicken breasts. Normally I can get both sides of that chicken in there, just boom, right into the jar. It slides in tighter than you would expect. I mean, it's packed. And then we're going to pressure can that according to regulations, which I'm not 100% sure. I do believe it's 75 minutes for a quart jar. It could be 90. Don't quote me on that. But don't put any liquid in there. If you put liquid in here, it's actually going to blow out in your pressure canner. This will actually create its own liquid, which, as you can see, there is liquid in there. And no, it's not to the head space. On the chicken breasts it usually is, but this is actually perfectly preserved, and it's the simplest thing you're ever going to can. So there it is. Canning tip number 1, put it in whole, no liquid, pressure can. Canning tip number 2, do not put your pressure canner on an electric stove. An electric stove, first of all, the glass top usually can't handle the weight of the All-American canner. And you can do a lot of damage to your electric cooktop that way. I actually use a propane stove outside. It keeps a more even temperature. Electric stoves will fluctuate. They'll come up and come down, come up and come down, and then your pressures are all off. It's fine for a water bath canner, but it's not good for a pressure canner. So if you don't have gas, take it outside, put it on a propane, and it does produce a lot of steam. And you can take the paint right off your cabinets near the stove. Canning tip number 3 is to use approved methods. Now, I have this ancient cookbook that's actually from World War II, where they actually talk about how to can when there's shortages, which is kind of relevant at the moment. But for approved methods for nowadays, I have a couple of different blue books. I have the little guy, which I actually use the thin one more than the thick one. And I have this that actually came as a gift with my All-American canner. But you want to use these approved methods because if you pressure can something but you don't pressure can it long enough, you're going to have a loss of product. That being said, let's move on to when you're keeping your jars. Let me get up and show you something here. This is wrong. This is right. And I know my canners out there know why this is wrong, but if you're new to canning, see what happens? You gotta take the rings off. Now I'm gonna have to, that seal is actually still good, perfectly good, but leaving a ring on while you're storing things, it can damage the seal. If I'm transporting jars to another location, like say they're given as a gift, or I'm donating them somewhere, then I put the ring back on just to keep it stable while moving. But it shouldn't be on your shelf with a ring on it. That there is tip number 4. So Tip number 5 is going to be controversial. And I know I'm going to get blown up for it, but I'm going to give this tip anyway. So, we're in a pretty severe can and lid shortage right now. I mean, you can get canning materials, but it's not the materials you want. So, I'm going to talk to you about reusing lids. I know it's controversial. My suggestion is to not reuse lids if you're going to pressure can, though. Strictly for water bath canning. Just because I'm concerned that the sealing agent may not hold up in the pressure canner with having been used before, but let me show you the difference. Okay, so now this was potatoes, but you can see that this lid is perfectly intact. There's no dents, it's not warped, and this sealing agent is perfect, and I can feel it that it's still very thick. Now this one was also used for potatoes, and while the sealing agent looks good, I want you to notice that there is this dent here. Yes, you can see that. This, in my opinion, could compromise a seal. That is an opening to allow air in, and we don't want that. So this lid goes in the garbage, and this lid can go on spaghetti sauce or something of that nature. That was my controversial tip of the day, tip number 5. Tip number 6, and let me flip to the page that I know for sure it's on. I say to use approved methods, but I also think that it's okay to tweak a recipe to your own needs. Tip number 6 is take notes. Now, if you make a change to a recipe, so you know the flavor is just exactly the way you want it, go ahead and write it right in your book. This is a note that I made in my sauerkraut, and in this old-timey book, I have to tell you, in the back is my grandmother took notes for the way she prefers to do corn, and in my small book, I have notes on applesauce and pickled eggs. But every time you make a change to a recipe and you discover that you love it, you have to write it down somewhere. You're never going to make it that way again. I've had abysmal failures with pickling vegetables because I was missing an ingredient I needed, but I didn't write a note. So now I can't remember what that particular ingredient is. So yes, tip number 6, take notes. Moving right on to tip number 7. If you'll see my canning shelf here, this is just my upstairs. This isn't downstairs. This is one stack and then a shelf and then one stack. Do not stack your jars. Don't do it, because once you put one on top of the other, you're now pressing down on this lid, and you can cause it to rock. You're going to lift edges. You're going to compromise seals. You're going to have losses. Please don't stack your jars. That's tip number 7. Tip number 8. Unless you're making pickles, and even in some cases there, peel your vegetables. So, and don't can asparagus. Unless you just hate asparagus and you want to do it damage, don't can asparagus. I will never do this again. This is the worst thing I've ever canned. And we did it twice. It's like once bitten, twice shy, right? Nope. These are mushy and terrible, and the flavor's actually too strong in a really bad way. Now, I have carrots here that I thought, oh, I don't like to peel my carrots. And we had 50 pounds of carrots. I didn't peel them. And now when I open this jar and I serve it, the peels kind of have come off, and then you find this ribbon of peel in your food, and it just isn't good. You'll see my potatoes over there. These are peeled. And I can potatoes because now I have pressure cooked potatoes and I can make mashed potatoes in minutes. I know the potatoes keep perfectly well in a root cellar, but this is a convenience issue. That was tip number 8 on vegetables. Peel your vegetables if they require peeling, and don't can asparagus. Now I'm going to talk to you about tip number 9 is what you can. Now this is beef stew, and this is beef stew from 2019. You notice it's not used. It's probably perfectly fine in there, but what happened was I made a lot of beef stew that was just okay. And now every time I open one, it's actually kind of a lot of work to make it more than just okay. And now I have beef locked up in here, potatoes, carrots, onions, you name it. Even beef broth, it's almost a loss because quite simply, it probably won't get used. And now that's a lot of ingredients in that one jar that could have just gone into their own jar. So now you also saw I have potatoes and I have carrots and I have chicken. I can just open those jars and make a meal out of it. My actual favorite ingredient to can is mushrooms, which I've heard mixed reviews from other canners on YouTube about canning mushrooms, but I love my canned mushrooms. This here is basically an instant gravy. You throw it in a pot, add some thickener and seasonings to it, and you have a beautiful mushroom gravy. I canned all of these in chicken stock because I found I was making a lot of roast chickens with mashed potatoes, and then I had the perfect gravy starter. Of course, you can drain the liquid out and use the mushrooms for other purposes. I made a chicken stroganoff last night, in which I didn't use the liquid in here, just the mushrooms. So, canned ingredients, not meals. And now, last but least, might require a little trip down to the basement. So hold on. So tip number 10 is all about not wasting jars, actually. A lot of people talk about canning beans. And I mean, honestly, unless it's green beans, there doesn't seem to be a purpose to canning beans. This is a perfectly fine method of storing beans. Store them dry. Why would you buy this, cook it off, put it in a jar, cook it again, just to come up with a texture you don't even like, when this will actually store just fine for kind of a long time. Years, actually. So, free up those jars. Don't can those beans. And, there's other methods. If you'll see here, I've got onions and potatoes, just sitting in this wooden crate here with some straw on top of it just to cut down on the moisture. So tip number 10, don't can things that aren't necessary to can. I'd like to thank Linda at Linda's Pantry for posting this virtual challenge on your top 10 canning tips. I've actually learned a lot watching the videos that are already posted. I'd also like to thank Lisa at Sutton's Days for responding to this challenge and showing it to me. So I hope you enjoyed, and please don't beat me up too much for reusing canning lids. So this is Angela for Cooking for Real, where I'm not only cooking for real, I'm cooking for you. And since you've come by to visit my little page, if you could subscribe, I'd really appreciate it.